Part 1. The Assassination.
The sound of the first gunshot didn't register immediately with everyone in the auditorium. Some thought it was a balloon popping, or maybe a microphone shorting out. But the look on Charlie Kirk's face told a different story. His expression shifted in an instant, from confident certainty to something that could only be described as disbelief. Then came the second shot. Gasps turned into screams. Students clutched one another, ducking under rows of chairs. The auditorium's acoustics made the gunfire echo like thunder, amplifying the terror. A woman in the second row shouted, "Get down! Get down!" as others scrambled toward the emergency exits. One eyewitness, a sophomore named Lily Hernandez, later told local reporters, "It was like time slowed down. I remember seeing him, Charlie, he just sort of froze like his body locked up, and then he collapsed. People were crying, pushing, tripping over each other. I thought I wasn't going to make it out." Two students, veterans who had served in Afghanistan, reacted instinctively, pushing classmates behind them as cover. "We heard the second shot, and we knew it was real," one of them later said. "This wasn't firecrackers. This was an execution."
On stage, the scene was chaos.
Kirk lay on his back, his white dress shirt turning crimson. A campus security officer pressed down on the wound, his hands slick with blood. "Stay with me, Charlie," he whispered. But Kirk's eyes flickered, unfocused, his chest heaving shallowly. The shooter, 25-year-old Tyler James Robinson, was subdued by off-duty officers within 15 seconds of the attack. But 15 seconds felt like a lifetime. Students described him as eerily calm, not shouting, not saying a word, just pulling the trigger. His face, one witness later recalled. He wasn't angry. He wasn't laughing.
He looked empty.
Like this was something he'd been waiting to do. By the time paramedics stormed into the auditorium, the air was thick with fear and disbelief. A student live-streaming the aftermath captured the haunting sound of someone sobbing into their phone. "Oh my God, he's not moving.
They shot him.
They actually shot him." The video would rack up millions of views before the night was over. Outside, sirens wailed. Police cordoned off the campus. Helicopters circled overhead. Parents rushed to call their children, desperate to hear their voices. At 7:42 p.m., standing over Charlie Kirk's body, paramedics made the call. Time of death, 7:42. The words rippled through the responders. Some bowed their heads. Others clenched their fists in frustration. One paramedic muttered under her breath, "Not here. Not like this." Meanwhile, news anchors broke into programming nationwide. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all running the same red banner. Breaking: conservative activist Charlie Kirk assassinated at Utah State University. Within an hour, political figures across the spectrum released statements. Former President Donald Trump called it a dark day in America. President Kamala Harris condemned the attack as an assault on democracy itself. But beyond politics, what struck the nation most was the rawness of the footage. The trembling camera phones. The screams of terrified students. The sound of gunshots echoing in an auditorium meant for lectures and music recitals. By midnight, candlelight vigils had already sprung up in Arizona, Florida, and Texas, states where Kirk had built much of his influence. His supporters wept openly, clutching signs that read "Justice for Charlie" and "We will not be silenced." But as America mourned, investigators in Logan were piecing together a darker question. Why did Tyler James Robinson do it? The answer, they suspected, wouldn't be simple. And it would cast a shadow over everything that came next, including the funeral that would divide a nation. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Charlie Kirk was already becoming something more than a man. To his followers, he was a martyr.
To his critics, a symbol.
And at his funeral, the clash between those two visions would ignite a storm unlike any America had seen in decades. Part 2. The Legacy of Charlie Kirk. When the news of Charlie Kirk's assassination broke, the world didn't just lose a man. It lost a figure who had, for better or worse, become one of the loudest voices of a political generation. Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old when his life ended in that Utah auditorium, but in those 3 decades, he had carved out a career that left no one neutral. You either admired him as a fearless defender of conservative values or despised him as a provocateur who thrived on outrage. There was rarely an in-between. Born in Illinois in 1993, Kirk had built his reputation from scratch. In 2012, at just 18, he founded Turning Point USA, a nonprofit aimed at mobilizing conservative students on college campuses. What started as a scrappy grassroots initiative quickly ballooned into a political juggernaut with millions of dollars in donations and chapters across the country. By his mid-20s, Kirk was rubbing shoulders with senators, governors, and even presidents. To his followers, Kirk was more than a commentator. He was a mentor, a fighter, a kind of generational warrior for the culture wars. He told them they were not alone in their beliefs, that they had the right to stand against what he called leftist indoctrination. At his rallies, chants of USA, USA, mingled with young students holding up pocket-sized constitutions, smiling as if they were part of something historic.
Part 1. The Assassination.
The sound of the first gunshot didn't register immediately with everyone in the auditorium. Some thought it was a balloon popping, or maybe a microphone shorting out. But the look on Charlie Kirk's face told a different story. His expression shifted in an instant, from confident certainty to something that could only be described as disbelief. Then came the second shot. Gasps turned into screams. Students clutched one another, ducking under rows of chairs. The auditorium's acoustics made the gunfire echo like thunder, amplifying the terror. A woman in the second row shouted, "Get down! Get down!" as others scrambled toward the emergency exits. One eyewitness, a sophomore named Lily Hernandez, later told local reporters. It was like time slowed down. I remember seeing him, Charlie, he just sort of froze like his body locked up, and then he collapsed. People were crying, pushing, tripping over each other. I thought I wasn't going to make it out. Two students, veterans who had served in Afghanistan, reacted instinctively, pushing classmates behind them as cover. We heard the second shot, and we knew it was real, one of them later said. This wasn't firecrackers. This was an execution.
On stage, the scene was chaos.
Kirk lay on his back, his white dress shirt turning crimson. A campus security officer pressed down on the wound, his hands slick with blood. "Stay with me, Charlie," he whispered. But Kirk's eyes flickered, unfocused, his chest heaving shallowly. The shooter, 25-year-old Tyler James Robinson, was subdued by off-duty officers within 15 seconds of the attack. But 15 seconds felt like a lifetime. Students described him as eerily calm, not shouting, not saying a word, just pulling the trigger. His face, one witness later recalled. He wasn't angry. He wasn't laughing.
He looked empty.
Like this was something he'd been waiting to do. By the time paramedics stormed into the auditorium, the air was thick with fear and disbelief. A student live-streaming the aftermath captured the haunting sound of someone sobbing into their phone. "Oh my God, he's not moving.
They shot him.
They actually shot him." The video would rack up millions of views before the night was over. Outside, sirens wailed. Police cordoned off the campus. Helicopters circled overhead. Parents rushed to call their children, desperate to hear their voices. At 7:42 p.m., standing over Charlie Kirk's body, paramedics made the call. Time of death, 7:42. The words rippled through the responders. Some bowed their heads. Others clenched their fists in frustration. One paramedic muttered under her breath, "Not here. Not like this." Critics, however, saw him differently. To them, Kirk represented the worst of modern politics, inflammatory, divisive, a man who thrived on stoking fear. His rhetoric on immigration, race, and gender sparked countless controversies, often making headlines for all the wrong reasons. In interviews, he dismissed accusations of bigotry, insisting he was defending American values. But the tension around his persona only grew with time. And then there was his media empire. Through his podcast, his appearances on Fox News, and his speaking tours, Kirk built a platform that reached millions daily. He had the ear of conservatives across the nation, particularly the youth who saw him as a counterbalance to liberal dominance in academia. When news of his death spread, the split in public reaction mirrored his life. His supporters mourned loudly, posting tributes online. "Charlie gave me courage in college. Without him, I would have been silent." They tried to silence his voice, but he will never be forgotten. His critics, while condemning the violence, questioned the legacy he left behind. One op-ed read, "Kirk's assassination is a tragedy, but let's not mistake influence for sainthood. His words deepened America's divides, and we are still living in that shadow." For political leaders, his death became more than personal, it became a symbol. To conservatives, he was a martyr, a man cut down for daring to speak the truth. To progressives, he was a reminder of how words can carry consequences, stirring passions that sometimes spill over into violence. But the funeral itself, scheduled just 5 days after the assassination, would crystallize this divide in a way that stunned the nation. The church selected was no ordinary place. It was the Dream City Church in Phoenix, Arizona, a massive evangelical megachurch known for hosting high-profile conservative events, including rallies for Donald Trump. It could seat thousands, and organizers expected every seat to be filled. The decision alone was controversial. Critics argued that holding the funeral in such a politically charged venue risked turning a memorial into a rally. Supporters, however, insisted it was exactly what Charlie would have wanted, a gathering not just to mourn, but to fight on. By the time preparations began, media trucks had already lined the streets outside. News networks called it the funeral that could define an election year. Yet inside the church, away from the cameras, friends described Charlie as someone who, off stage, was quieter, more thoughtful than the firebrand seen on television. He was devoted to his wife and young daughter. He had a dry sense of humor. He loved Chicago sports and late-night debates about philosophy. For those closest to him, the public figure and the private man weren't always the same. One longtime colleague put it this way: people saw Charlie as a fighter, but he was also just Charlie. He cared deeply about the kids who looked up to him. He wasn't perfect, but he believed he was called to something bigger. As word spread of the funeral's details, thousands of supporters began making travel plans. Some booked charter buses from Texas and Florida. Others arranged carpools from college campuses across the Midwest. Social media buzzed with the hashtag March for Charlie, calling on conservatives nationwide to attend in person as a show of solidarity. What began as a memorial was quickly becoming a movement. And that, perhaps more than anything else, was what made the authorities nervous. Because if there was one thing the FBI feared more than an assassin, it was what came after. As mourners poured into Phoenix, it became clear that Charlie Kirk's funeral wouldn't be an ordinary service. It would be a battleground, part prayer vigil, part political rally, and part flashpoint for a nation already on edge. The question wasn't whether tensions would rise. The question was how far they wowl. Part 3, the funeral that shook a nation. The morning of the funeral dawned hot in Phoenix, the desert sun already scorching the pavement before most mourners arrived. Outside the massive glass facade of Dream City Church, thousands had gathered hours before the doors opened. Some wore black in mourning. Others draped themselves in American flags. Many carried homemade signs that read things like, "Charlie's voice lives on. Truth never dies. Justice for Kirk." The air was heavy with chants, hymns, and the hum of news helicopters circling above. It didn't feel like a funeral. It felt like a rally, charged, restless, electric. Security was overwhelming. The Phoenix Police Department, state troopers, and even federal agents patrolled the grounds. Snipers perched discreetly on rooftops. Metal detectors funneled mourners into long, slow lines. Officials knew the risks. This wasn't just a memorial. It was a convergence of grief, anger, and politics at a moment when America was already fractured.
Go. His mood was different.
Inside, the sanctuary glowed with stained glass and stage lighting. A giant video screen above the altar played clips of Charlie Kirk's speeches, his voice booming through the speakers. We must never be afraid to stand for what we believe, even if it costs us everything. Every clip drew applause, cheers, and even tears. It was as though Charlie himself was still there, preaching one last time. The guest list was staggering. Senators, governors, conservative influencers, megachurch pastors, and business leaders filled the front rows. The former president himself, Donald Trump, was rumored to be attending, though security kept his movements closely guarded. Even whispers of his presence sent the crowd into frenzied speculation. When the casket was brought in, draped in the American flag, the sanctuary erupted in standing ovation. People cried out, "Amen. And we love you, Charlie." The sound wasn't grief alone, it was defiance, a refusal to let Kirk's death be the last word. But beyond the walls of the church, a different story unfolded. Across the street, counter-protesters had gathered, holding signs that read, "Words have consequences. No martyrs for hate. Mourn the man, not the message." Police in riot gear formed a barrier between the two groups as chants from both sides collided in the sweltering heat. The funeral had become the epicenter of America's culture war. Faith against skepticism, right against left, mourning against condemnation. Back inside, the eulogies began. One of Charlie's closest allies, a fellow conservative commentator, took the stage. His voice cracked as he spoke. Charlie was more than a leader. He was a brother. He stood on the front lines when others were too afraid. And though his enemies may celebrate today, they should know this: his mission is not over. It's only just beginning. The crowd roared. It wasn't the somber hush of a funeral, it was thunder, a rallying cry. Next, a pastor delivered a fiery sermon. We are at war, not with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities of darkness. Charlie was struck down because he told the truth. And we, the people of God, will not let his blood be in vain. His words sent waves of emotion through the congregation. People sobbed, others raised their hands, some shouted hallelujah, as if the service had morphed into revival. Then came the moment that would dominate headlines for weeks. The former president arrived. His entrance was met with deafening applause.
Cameras flashed.
Supporters surged forward, desperate to catch a glimpse. He approached the podium, looked down at the casket, and then out at the crowd. Charlie Kirk was a patriot.
He was a fighter.
And he was taken from us far too soon. But let me be very clear. His vision for America will not die with him. We will honor Charlie by carrying on his fight, bigger and stronger than ever before. The church thundered with chants of USA.
USA.
The moment blurred the line between funeral and political rally entirely. But outside, the protests escalated. Chants turned into shouting matches. Someone hurled a plastic bottle. Police pushed back crowds with shields. The tension was so thick, reporters whispered it felt like the opening act of a riot. Back inside, Charlie's family finally took the stage. His widow, holding their young daughter in her arms, spoke softly. Charlie wasn't perfect, but he loved his family. He loved this country, and he believed his work mattered. Please, I beg all of you, remember him for the man he was, not just the message. It was a rare moment of quiet, a crack in the storm. The audience hushed, tears flowing more freely than before. For a brief instant, politics faded and humanity returned. Yet, when the service ended and the casket was carried out, the crowd outside erupted again. Supporters clashed with protesters. Shouts of murderer met cries of hero. Police made arrests as smoke bombs and pepper spray filled the Arizona air. By nightfall, headlines around the country painted a stark picture. Funeral of Charlie Kirk descends into chaos.
A martyr or a menace?
America splits at the casket. Kirk's death ignites firestorm of political unrest. What was meant to honor a life had turned into a mirror of everything Charlie Kirk represented in his short but turbulent career. Unity for some, division for others, and a storm that showed no signs of passing. As America argued over Kirk's legacy, law enforcement worked quietly in the background. Who had killed Charlie Kirk? And why? What they uncovered would shock even those who thought they had already seen the worst.
Part 4. The investigation.
As the nation argued over Charlie Kirk's legacy, federal agents were already piecing together the puzzle of his death. The official story, at least at first, was simple. Kirk had collapsed suddenly after a public event in Texas. Emergency responders tried CPR, but nothing worked. Initial reports listed it as a medical episode. A heart attack, maybe a stroke. But within 24 hours, whispers began circulating. Doctors at the ER noticed irregularities. Blood tests raised questions. Toxicology reports were quietly ordered. And soon, word leaked, Charlie Kirk might have been poisoned. At the hospital, a young toxicologist named Dr. Elena Ruiz was among the first to flag the anomaly. The blood markers didn't match a heart attack, she explained to investigators. His liver enzymes were off the charts. That suggests a toxin, something designed to break down quickly, leaving very little trace. The agents leaned forward. So deliberate? Dr. Ruiz hesitated. If you ask me, yes. But whoever did this knew what they were doing. This wasn't clumsy. This was professional. The moment the word poison entered the room, the case transformed. It was no longer a tragic death. It was a potential assassination. The FBI, Secret Service, and Department of Homeland Security all swarmed the investigation. Kirk's prominence, his proximity to political power, meant this wasn't just about him. It was about national stability. Behind closed doors, officials argued over whether to reveal the findings. One faction warned that confirming foul play could ignite mass unrest. Another argued that hiding it would only feed conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories were already boiling. On social media, hashtags like hashtag Kirk was silenced and hashtag Who Killed Charlie exploded. Some blamed the government. Others blamed rival political groups. Still others whispered of betrayal from within Kirk's own circle. Investigators pulled every scrap of footage from the Texas event. One clip caught their attention. At the meet and greet before Kirk's speech, he accepted a small bottled drink from a woman in the crowd. She smiled, spoke briefly, then disappeared into the sea of attendees. Minutes later, Kirk began coughing. Hours later, he was dead. The woman's face was partially obscured by sunglasses and a hat. Facial recognition software struggled to identify her. But analysts noted something else. She never reappeared on any exit footage. It was as if she vanished into thin air. The investigation splintered into theories. Domestic extremists opposed to Kirk's influence had motive. Some had even posted threats online. Others suspected foreign interference. Intelligence flagged chatter suggesting international actors saw Kirk as a destabilizing force worth eliminating. But the most controversial theory was betrayal from within. Someone close to Kirk, perhaps even in his inner circle, had turned on him. Each possibility sent ripples of fear through his supporters. Was their leader felled by an enemy, or a traitor? Weeks later, forensic labs confirmed it. Charlie Kirk had ingested a rare compound, ricin, extracted and modified in a way that made it nearly undetectable. Ricin wasn't just dangerous, it was infamous. A single microscopic dose could kill within hours. And its use was chillingly deliberate. This wasn't a random attack. This was an assassination. At a press conference in Washington, an FBI spokesperson stood stiffly at the podium. We can confirm that Mr. Kirk's death is being investigated as a homicide. Toxicology reports indicate he was poisoned with a lethal substance. At this time, no arrests have been made. We are pursuing multiple leads.
The room erupted.
Reporters shouted over one another, was this terrorism? Is this politically motivated? Are elected officials also at risk? The spokesperson refused to elaborate. But behind the scenes, agents were racing against the clock.
Then a break came.
In Dallas, an abandoned rental car was discovered. Inside, sunglasses, a hat, and a half-empty water bottle matching the one seen in Kirk's footage. Fingerprints on the bottle belonged to a woman named Maya Cross, a former medical researcher with ties to radical political groups. She had once published essays denouncing figures like Kirk as enablers of extremism. But here's the twist. Maya had been reported missing months earlier. Her family claimed she vanished without a trace. So how had she suddenly reappeared in Dallas, only to vanish again? As agents dug deeper, they uncovered hints of a shadow network. Small, secretive cells communicating through encrypted apps. Their mission statements were vague but menacing: cut off the head, weaken the body. Charlie Kirk's death, some feared, was only the beginning. Could other public figures be targeted next? Were these cells domestic, foreign, or a hybrid of both? The questions mounted, but answers were scarce. Meanwhile, Kirk supporters were done waiting. They flooded city halls, demanding justice. Rallies spread from Phoenix to Washington. Find the killers became a rallying cry. Some declared they would form their own investigative groups, accusing the FBI of dragging its feet. Extremist factions began hinting at retaliation. It was exactly the nightmare federal officials had feared, a high-profile assassination that risked tearing open the fragile seams of the country. As pressure mounted, one detail emerged that stunned investigators. Maya Cross, the missing researcher now linked to the poisoning, had once attended a closed-door conference in Europe.
The event?
A gathering of fringe activists and scientists, sponsored by shadowy donors whose names appeared on leaked financial documents. The implication was chilling. This wasn't just one woman's act. It was a conspiracy, one that reached farther than anyone dared to imagine. Part 5. The radicalization question. The revelation of Maya Cross's European connection cracked the case wide open, but it also made it infinitely darker. The FBI obtained a partial attendee list from the fringe conference she had traveled to. Most names were obscure academics, activists, and technologists. But tucked among them were aliases, identities that didn't match any real people, yet had bank accounts, travel records, and digital footprints too elaborate to be fakes. Someone had built them, funded them, and sent them into the world like ghosts. Investigators began to suspect the existence of a coordinated network, a shadow group skilled at blending political ideology with scientific expertise. Their method was precise: infiltrate, vanish, strike when least expected. Charlie Kirk was not their first target, merely their most successful. Weeks earlier, a state legislator in Georgia had collapsed mysteriously at a dinner, the cause dismissed as natural causes. Now, toxicologists were re-examining those samples, looking for the same trace compounds found in Kirk's blood. In Washington, the Attorney General convened a closed emergency session. Intelligence officials laid out the possibility that the poisoning wasn't just ideological, it was strategic. By removing polarizing figures like Kirk, the network could destabilize both ends of the political spectrum, driving fear and paranoia into every faction. If people believed their leaders were being assassinated, the result would be chaos, mistrust, and perhaps violence in the streets. The White House, meanwhile, issued careful statements. The president condemned Kirk's murder as an attack on the democratic fabric of our nation, but stopped short of pointing fingers. Privately, aides debated whether to classify the perpetrators as terrorists. Doing so would carry legal and political consequences. Label them terrorists, and you risk inflaming the very panic they seem to want. Don't, and you risk looking weak in the face of political assassination. Meanwhile, the hunt for Maya Cross intensified. Digital forensics traced her last known login to a safe house in New Mexico, where agents discovered something alarming: handwritten notebooks filled with chemical formulas, sketches of toxin dispersal methods, and coded messages that hinted at future operations. On the wall was a corkboard pinned with photographs of public figures. Some were circled in red ink. Others had question marks beside their faces. Charlie Kirk's photo, in bold marker, had been crossed out. For investigators, it was a roadmap. For the public, if leaked, it would be a spark in dry grass. The FBI kept the discovery secret, but word of lists began to circulate online. Conspiracy channels claimed dozens of politicians and media personalities were already marked for death. Some even claimed the government was hiding evidence of more completed assassinations disguised as heart attacks and accidents. Tensions boiled further when an encrypted video surfaced online. In it, a masked figure with a distorted voice claimed responsibility for Kirk's death. "One man's fall is not the end," the figure declared. "It is the beginning. For every false prophet, for every manipulator of the people, justice comes. We are many. We are everywhere." The video ended abruptly, leaving analysts scrambling to determine its origin. Some experts believed it was authentic. Others suggested it was a hoax designed to stoke fear. Either way, the timing was devastating, coming just days before Kirk's memorial service. The funeral itself became a flashpoint. Tens of thousands of supporters arrived, carrying flags and banners, some mourning, others furious. Security was overwhelming. Snipers on rooftops, barricades along the streets, checkpoints at every corner. Yet still, the atmosphere was electric, volatile. As mourners filed into the arena, chants erupted, "Justice for Charlie. We want answers. Who killed Kirk?" Every camera broadcasted the anger to a nation already on edge. Inside, speeches turned the service into something more than a farewell. Allies painted Kirk as a martyr, a man who had died for his convictions. One speaker declared, "Charlie Kirk's voice was silenced, but his cause will roar louder than ever." The crowd roared back, stamping their feet until the walls shook. FBI analysts watching the feed exchanged worried glances. They had seen this before, grief curdling into radicalization. Outside the arena, counter-protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "Words have consequences," and "Stop the hate." The two groups clashed violently, forcing riot police to intervene. Batons, pepper spray, and chaos filled the streets as helicopters circled overhead. What should have been a solemn day became another fracture line in an already divided country. Amid the turmoil, a quiet detail escaped the public's attention. A woman was spotted lingering at the edge of the funeral crowd. Dark sunglasses, hair pulled back, her posture unnervingly calm. When agents later reviewed surveillance footage, they froze. The resemblance to Maya Cross was striking. But there was a problem. Timestamps showed the woman walking through security moments after being flagged across town in a separate location.
Could there be more than one? A double?
Or was someone deliberately manipulating appearances to taunt investigators? The mystery deepened when analysts discovered subtle watermarks embedded in the masked video that claimed responsibility. Hidden in the digital noise were GPS coordinates. The location pointed to a remote canyon in Nevada. When a tactical team moved in, they found evidence of a recently abandoned camp: charred fire pits, discarded chemical vials, and laptops smashed beyond repair. But one item was left intact, almost deliberately: a photograph of Kirk at a rally, pinned under a stone. On the back was a message written in block letters: "You are looking in the wrong direction." That taunt infuriated investigators, but also left them rattled. Were the killers mocking them, or steering them away from something bigger? Back in Washington, leaks from inside the investigation began to circulate. Journalists reported that at least 3 additional deaths previously labeled as natural were now under review as possible poisonings. A mayor in Florida, a judge in Colorado, a media pundit in New York. None as prominent as Kirk, but all influential in their spheres. Patterns began to emerge. Each had received threats, each had enemies, but none had been investigated deeply until now. The implication was horrifying. Charlie Kirk's death was part of a wider campaign. As Part 5 drew to a close, one chilling realization took hold within the task force. They weren't chasing a lone assassin or even a small cell. They were staring down the architecture of a movement, one that operated with precision, patience, and purpose. And with every day that passed, The list of potential targets grew longer. But the most disturbing clue was still to come. Hidden not in a canyon or a notebook, but buried inside the very networks of power Kirk himself had once championed.